Hey there everyone, welcome on into VG Emporium, video game music and more. I'm your host Rage Cage, and today I got something interesting here for you. Because for those that have been listening for a while, you know that I'd put a big emphasis on chiptune. Because, that is what I'm really into. I love listening to it. Be it with simple waveforms, frequency modulation, or even, yes, samples. I love it all. So it may be no surprise that the shelves here at VG Emporium are lacking of more modern non-chip based music. Though it does make its way in here from time to time, but maybe not as frequently as I should. And I'm gonna do that by looking into CD audio of failed CD-based consoles. Because here at VG Emporium, I like to keep things pretty obscure, and what could be more obscure than some consoles that barely got to even live. Though a couple of them did have somewhat of a good run, it's just that they were always too little too late in trying to catch up with the other consoles that were doing much better than they were. Now some of these are pretty well known because of their notoriety made through video game reviewers and videos and such, while some of them I didn't even know existed until I really started looking into other CD consoles outside of the big ones. So now maybe I should refer to these as disc-based consoles because there are a couple that are using other disc formats other than CD, but the majority of them CD-based. Now you may be wondering, why am I doing this episode? Where did this idea come from? Well, if you remember a few episodes back, I did a grab bag where I featured a song from The Legend of Zelda: The Faces of Evil, which is a CDI game, which I never really realized had pretty good music in it. I never looked past the animated cutscenes that have been memed to hell. And then after that, I looked into The Wand of Gamelon, which is the second CDI Zelda game, and the soundtrack in that is even better than Faces of Evil, and is actually the, that game and the soundtrack are the inspiration behind Arzette, The Jewel of Faramore, which came out just last month on Valentine's Day, which is a really good game, and if you haven't played it, go play it. It takes the ideas of those Zelda CDI games and realizes them to their full potential, and the soundtrack by button masher Jake Silverman is just absolutely fantastic. But the thing that really kicked this idea off was a video done by Mega64 where they recreated a scene from the very infamous game Plumbers Don't Wear Ties. And I believe the scene is called John Distracts Thresher or something like that. And they're all out in this public place and they're just standing still with the audio playing, and it's revealed that they actually have a speaker playing the audio just out loud, echoing. And these people are just watching and moving around while they're just standing still while this dialogue is going on. Is ridiculous. But the thing that really caught my attention was the music in the background of it. It's just this really weird sounding thing I couldn't quite explain. And then, I decided, hey, I want to feature this song in an episode. And then this idea of the failed CD consoles clicked in my head and oh, hey, I'm going to do this. But then I decided to go an extra step and just feature games that were exclusive to those consoles where, whereas Plumbers Don't Wear Ties didn't quite fit there because it was also released on PCs. So yeah, unfortunately, that won't get featured. I was going to try to open with that one until I found out about the PC release. But I may do an episode after this featuring music from games that I thought were exclusives, but then I found they had releases on other consoles or computer systems. So yeah, the long and short of it is, quote-unquote, failed CD consoles, focusing on exclusives, which have surprisingly good music. So without further ado, let's get into the episode proper by telling you what we opened up with. This was Chilton Hotel Floor 3-3. From Hotel Mario on the Philips CDI, composed by Marc St. Regis. And I kind of feel like this is a cheap pick because, Hotel Mario, it's one of the ones that is so well known because of the YouTube poops, just how ridiculous it is, and also a Mario on a non-Nintendo console. But it just really came down to, every time I found a track that I liked, I would look it up and find that, there was a release outside of the CDI. So then I'd go on to the next track, and that one had another release outside of the CDI, and it just, kept happening. So then it just finally came down to the ones that I knew were CDI exclusive, the Zelda and Mario games. So I went with Hotel Mario because I discovered this game has some pretty fucking wacky music. Because much like the CDI Zelda games, all I was really familiar with were those animated cutscenes and, the music that was behind that and how, hokey that sounded. And, of course, nice of the princess to invite us over for a picnic, eh, Luigi? I hope she made lots of spaghetti. I tried with Luigi. I can do Mario, but Luigi, I don't know why. But yes, finally diving into the soundtrack, yeah, there's some really crazy jams in there, like this guy right here. And the majority of them, I believe, are done by Marc St. Regis. Another name I saw come up, though, was Jack Levy, though I was able to confirm that this song was done by Marc St. Regis. And yeah, the first thing that popped out to me, and the reason why I picked this track is because the percussion sounds from the YM2413. Most likely it's from one of the Yamaha budget keyboards that use the sound chip in it. But yeah, it's undeniable. The kick, the snare, the hi-hat, just yeah, I love that sound chip, so I know when I hear it. And then, of course, that bass line just moving all over the place really weird-like. And then just those stabs that happen, like, the Wurzler stab that's happening in the background, and then those horn stabs right here, and like the marimba? Like, what is going on with this thing? Like, why? But now I gotta cool down, and I'll come back to this after I tell you a bit about the CDI, which you may have noticed before this song played. You heard a startup sound, which was the Philips CDI startup, which is the thing I should note here is that for each song, I'm going to be playing the console startup, if they had one. So the CDI was a co-development between Philips and Sony, beginning in 1984, and was officially announced in 1986. And the original intention for this device was for point of sale, education, and home entertainment, movies and such. Video games weren't even into the equation until much later, with the particular CDs that were going to be made for it having text, audio, and graphics in it. It being somewhat of an evolution of the Green Book format, becoming, I think, what's called the Philips White Book. I don't know. Like I said, just breezing right through this. And so a lot of people were really excited by this technology and the CD format because of just its multi-purpose use. But unfortunately, due to delays, like it was originally slated to release in 1987, interest started dying down, and just kept happening until its official release in 1993. And by this point, there were a lot of devices that had the CD front covered, such as PCs, and CD-based consoles, such as the Sega Mega CD and the NEC PC Engine CD, which these released before the CDI came out. So in between that time, Philips had started making more of a focus towards video games by, again, too little, too late. And though it did have some interesting games, case in point, Hotel Mario here, they just weren't as impressive as what was going on in those other CD-based consoles. And then the CDI console itself, also tried to double as like a kind of a PC in a way. Had tried to have like online support, though that didn't quite work out. Like it tried to have, just tried so many different things, but they just never landed. And this, unfortunately, is going to be the tale for many of these other consoles. They just try to be so many different things, trying to be the thing, and it not working out whatsoever. And so by 1996, Philips was done with it. They were just like, let's get out of here with it. And, between 1996 and 1999, a few other games would be released for it. The last one being Solar Crusade. And then I'm pretty sure the rest of the history. Console got panned in the 2000s by so many game reviewers, most notably the angry video game nerd when he was playing through the CDI Zelda games. And then, of course, those crazy edits on early YouTube that would become YouTube poops of those animated cutscenes from the Zelda games and Hotel Mario, which, now getting back to Hotel Mario, it is, surprisingly, one of the better games on the CDI. And if you're wondering about the whole, like, a Nintendo game being on this weird Sony Philips console, there are many other videos and people that explain this far better than I could. I'm just going to tell you about this game. So what is Hotel Mario? Well, it's definitely not a normal Mario game. It does have some familiar elements, like you can jump on enemies, you got the Mario, you got the Luigi, you got the Peach, you got the Bowser, you got the Koopalings, but this here is a single-screen puzzle game where you have to close every single door on each floor that is on the screen in order to progress to the next level. And there are multiple levels within each hotel, and there's 7 hotels, each one run by a different Koopaling until you get to the last one, which of course is Bowser, who's ready to take care of these pesky plumbers. But of course, the thing that it's most remembered for are of course those animated cutscenes and the many videos that are made from them, where you get wonderfully memorable lines such as, "You know what they say, all toasters toast, toast. When you pinch Wendy's pennies, they pinch back." And then, of course, a classic YouTube poop opener, "Where there's smoke, they pinch back." But enough nonsense. Marc St. Regis, I really couldn't find anything on them. The only other thing I could find was a YouTube video where it says, the game, it needs you. And it definitely matches the vibe of the song, though it's a little bit more electro-funk hip-hop, if that makes sense. So yeah, we're just going to move on to our next console, our next track. And this is one of the ones that I did not know existed, that being the Bandai Apple Pippin. And the track is track 8 from the game Racing Days.
Pippin.
that was track 8 from Racing Days with an unknown composer released on the Apple Pippin. Though it does have a couple other names like the Apple Pippin at World or the Bandai at Marc. Before we dive into the Pippin, I'll tell you a little bit about this game Racing Days, and as you can imagine by the title, it is a racing game, though from what I've read and some videos I've seen, not very good one. Where it really shines is that it's fully polygonal and it's pretty good looking. I mean, as far as the car models go, one of the things I kept seeing said about this game is that it was a showcase for what the Pippin was capable of as far as polygonal graphics. But unfortunately, by that time, 1996, there were far better looking and playing racing games. But where this game really excels is the music, as you're hearing right here. As you would imagine with a CD-based game, you have some really high-quality Redbook audio here, like this track right here, like some super hyper funky city pop tune, and then the other songs, which I surprisingly found on a SoundCloud account, sounds like they could have all been pulled from Mega Man X4, 5, and 6. Now to get into the Pippin, it was developed by Apple and manufactured by Bandai, and it was released in Japan as the Pippin at Marc, and in the US as the Pippin at World. It was a CD-based gaming console, though like with most of the consoles that we will be talking about today, Apple was looking to make it more than just a gaming console, but actually a home computer that people would be able to use for so many different things. This due to its being based off of the Macintosh Power PC. So beyond games, there was a lot of software done for it, mostly converted from the Power PC. So the usual things like word processor, business tools, and, ability to browse the web. And Apple had plans to iterate on it because they had high hopes for it becoming a all-in-one household computer. But the main usage of the Pippin was for gaming. And, as you can imagine with a lot of these CD-based consoles, a large portion of the library is edutainment. And then this being manufactured by Bandai, the second largest portion is made up of games based off of properties they had rights to, which a good portion of those are also edutainment. And another thing that Apple was hoping to do with the Pippin was pushing third-party developers to create PCI-compatible devices. So basically making add-ons for the Pippin, like floppy drives, network connections, and other kind of add-ons that would expand on the computer portion of this console. Now, the main reason why most people may not know the existence of this console is because it was only had like a 1-year lifespan, from 96 to 97. In the US, it did not go well for it at all. I mean, not only was it competing with the Sony PlayStation, the Sega Saturn, and actual PCs, the initial cost of it at $600 was not doing it any favors either. And the death knell came when Steve Jobs rejoined Apple in 97, basically saying, "Get that shit out of here." And once that decision was made, all the at-world consoles that were still in their stock were sent back to Japan, rebranded as at Marc, and of course, production on the console in Japan was just totally cut by mid-97. But, surprisingly, the support for it went on until 2002. So yeah, another case of an overambitious device, released at a time where there were better and cheaper options. Now, a little heads up, this would not be the first unsuccessful CD-based console that Bandai would manufacture. There was one that is technically a predecessor to the Pippin, but we'll be getting to that one a little later. Now, if you remember at the beginning of the episode, I mentioned that all these consoles are disc-based, but not necessarily all CD-based. Because the next console we have coming up here is DVD-based. Ooh! And it is called the VM Labs Nuon. And what I'm going to play for you is track 3 from Tempest 3000, composed by TNT, Andre Meyer, and or James Grunke. And that was track 3 from Tempest 3000, composed by TNT, Andre Meyer, and or James Grunke, released on the VM Labs Nuon. Though the Nuon wasn't just one machine, it was more of a technology that was used in multiple machines, manufactured by Motorola, RCA, Samsung, and Toshiba. So Nuon was more of a technology that could be put into DVD players to allow them to enhance the DVD experience as well as play games. The first of these DVD players being released in the year 2000, and VM Labs was hoping that the Nuon technology would be a competitor against consoles that were out at this time, so the Sega Dreamcast, the upcoming, and then not to mention the GameCube and the Xbox that came out the following year. So you can imagine how well this went. But it had a fairly okay run, like it officially got discontinued about 2004. Though that is kind of surprising because there's not a lot of software for this thing. I mean, like as far as DVDs, there were only 4 released that had enhanced features that were only accessible by the Nuon. These being Planets of the Apes, the 2001 remake, Dr. Dolittle 2, Bedazzled, the 2000 remake, and of all things, The Adventures of Buckaroo Banzai Across the 8th Dimension. Which, if you have no idea what that is, look up a trailer. It is bonkers. But hey, there are 3 confirmed unreleased movies with the Nuon enhanced features, these being Galaxy Quest, Stigmata, and Toxic Adventure 3, The Last Temptation of Toxie. And now, what are these enhanced features? Well, they included things like smooth, seamless scanning of the DVD video, 20 times zoom, action capture, angle view, smart matrix, and snapshot. But hey, this is a technology that was also supposed to be capable of gaming, so you'd imagine, what, there'd be a lot of games for it? There's only 8 officially released games. Only 8. So we got Iron Soldier 3, Space Invaders XL, Ballistic, Merlin Racing, The Next Tetris, Freefall 3050 to AD, Tempest 3000, and, only released in South Korea, Crayon Shinchan 3. But according to the website nuondome.com, where you can get all the information on the Nuon that your little heart desires, there were a whole lot of games that were potentially in development for the Nuon, and this is possibly due to the fact that VM Labs made the SDK available to third parties for a relatively low cost. But I guess it was very hard to work with, which led to a lot of these games that were in development, quote unquote, not being completed in any way. But there's one of these games in this list that was actually pretty close to being done and ready to be released, but never was and is considered lost media, and that is Bust-A-Move 4. And the article about it on nuondome.com is a pretty interesting read. But now getting back to that SDK, it allowed for a homebrew scene to happen for this technology, surprisingly. And there's a fair amount of games and software developed by this fan base, which are freely available online, and you can download them and then burn them to a CDR or RW, and then load it into your Nuon-capable DVD player, if you have one. Isn't that neat? Now, I'm going to talk to you about Tempest 3000. This here is one of the games that really stood out on the Nuon because, well, creator Jeff Minter went absolutely insane with it. But first, a little history. Tempest was initially released in the arcade in 1981. It was a vector-based space shooter where your craft would go around in this tube circle thing and shoot at objects that were coming down along the paths. And honestly, I've only ever seen videos of it. I've never actually played it myself, but even then, it looks really impressive. Then in '94, with the permission of the original creator Dave Thurer, Jeff Minter created Tempest 2000 for the ill-fated Atari Jaguar, which is another one we'll be visiting here soon. And he took that simple white wireframe vector look and added colors and power-ups and all kinds of crazy stuff. And so then we come to Tempest 3000, which takes most everything that was done in Tempest 2000 and cranks it up to 11. Visually, musically, just a treat for the senses. And it is by far considered the best game for the Nuon, and is a only reason to get the Nuon. Though in my search for information on this game, I did come across some forum posts saying that emulation for this game is coming along pretty well and maybe possible. That was 2002, so who knows, maybe it can work now. But now finally, let's get into the music of this game. As you can tell, this is some techno right here, and it would fit right in with that episode I did with Crazy Goji a couple weeks ago. And the rest of the soundtrack could be largely considered techno, though some of it does go into trance and big beat. And for the most part, it's all really good. I mean, it fits perfectly with this kind of game where you can just get really into like this trance-like state of just zooming through the colors and wireframes and all kinds of crazy stuff. But yeah, this track right here, I like this one. This is my favorite because it has all the breakbeats. There's that house piano coming in and out, and it has enough going on where it's not too repetitive. And it has this nice ridiculous energy about it too. But speaking of ridiculous, the next track I have coming up here for you is utterly delightful in its ridiculousness, which is my clever segue into our next console, the NEC PCFX. The song is called Stage 5 from the game Chip Chan Kick, composed by Yoshio Furukawa. And that was Stage 5 from Chip Chan Kick, composed by Yoshio Furukawa from the NEC PCFX, those jointly created by NEC and Hudson Soft. And this one is an interesting little beast. It was created as a successor to the PC Engine, also known as the TurboGrafx 16. And much like the PC Engine, the PCFX, despite having the PC in its name, was not a PC. It was a gaming console, first and foremost, though the design was made to look like a PC tower of the time, that being 1994. And this was a 32-bit console, though unlike many of the consoles that would be coming out around this time, they did not prioritize 3D graphics whatsoever, focusing on sprite-based games as well as FMV-based games, these being animated and fully voice-acted. And it would be different combinations of, like, the gameplay being sprites and then cutscenes being animated, or the actions actually being FMVs themselves and just being kind of cut up and chopped up depending on which commands you put in. So you can imagine a lot of the games on here are like, dating sims, some fighting games, a lot of RPGs, some shmups, and puzzle games like Chip Chan Kick. And the kind of puzzle game this was one of those single screen ones where you have multiple platforms and you gotta clear all the enemies off before you proceed to the next stage. And how this works is that you go around as either Chip or Chap, so why it's not called Chip Chap Kick, I don't know, but you go around, stun them with this weird glob thing you have, and then you gotta kick them, and they go flying across the platforms, and if they hit other enemies along the way, they knock them out too, and then they just fly up and explode into some kind of suite. Once you clear all the enemies, you have a little mini boss that pops up that you gotta hit with the globby, and then you go on to the next round, and then you clear all the different rounds until I think round 8, and then you face an actual big boss. You hit him multiple times with the globby thing, you go back to the level select, and then once you select the next level, you have another cutscene, which I forgot to mention are like the pixel-based kind. The only FMV in here I think is the opening as far as I've seen, but all these cutscenes are fully voice acted. And that's about it. And now as far as the music, as you can tell, it is CD quality, Redbook audio. But this is not the case for all the games on the PCFX, because usually for the more complex games like RPGs or ones that have a lot of FMV and voice acting, they utilize the HUC 6230 for audio, which is essentially the same as the HUC 6280, which is the sound chip for the PC Engine, but the big major difference being here that it has the ability to play back 80 PCM, as well as some controls for the CD audio. And hey, if you'd like to hear more about the different kinds of audio of the NEC PCFX, check out XVGM Radio's episode 108, NEC PCFX, where they really dive into this odd little console. Now before I close things out on about this console, let me tell you about our composer here, Yoshio Furukawa, who went under the name JKL Furukawa for all his credits, which there are only 5. Starting with Cyberblock Metal Orange on the PC-98 in 1990, had a hand in Veritex on the Sega Mega Drive alongside Hitoshi Sakamoto and Masaharu Iwata, Dragon Master Silk, Ryu Shoken Musume, Chip Chen Kick of course, and then Star Platinum in 1996, which is his last credit. So a fairly short but very strong body of work. So now getting back to the PCFX, like I said, it was released in 1994, but was discontinued in 1998, so a 4-year lifespan. And this was largely due to the fact that there were some higher end consoles out at the time that were able to do 3D graphics and had a lot more variety of games and, wasn't so like specialized. Because like many of these CD-based consoles I'll be talking about today, NEC had the plans for making this more of a multimedia based console, outside of the games. They were hoping that people would use it for playing audio CDs, photo CDs of all things. They did not prioritize video CDs, and they also made it possible to be used as a CD drive for the NEC PC if you did not have a drive for it already. And it also didn't help that they had a lot of support from third-party developers, though, this console did have 62 games released on it. It just wasn't enough. And so with that, we move on to our next maligned console. And this one is very interesting. You thought a DVD-based game console was something? How about Laserdisc? Yeah, this one is the Pioneer Laseractive. And the track is called Imaginal Beast Music 1 from the game Goku. And no, it's not that Goku. Kinda. And this was composed by Harumi Harry Hosono. That was Imaginal Beast Music 1 from Goku, composed by Haroini Hosono. And this is on the Pioneer Laseractive, which is a Laserdisc-based game console. Yes, you heard that right, Laserdisc. So if you had the cash for this at the time, $700, you too could play games like Dragon's Lair or Ace Cadet in your own home. And it of course could play movies on Laserdisc. And then for a few hundred extra bucks, you could also turn it into a karaoke machine with the Laser Karaoke add-on, which came with a module that you stuck into a slot, a mixer, and a microphone. But wait, there's more. To expand upon its game playability, there are 2 packs you could get. The LD-ROM 2 pack, which would allow you to play LD2-ROM Laserdiscs, NEC CD-ROM 2s, as well as the PC Engine's Hue cards. And then the second one being the MegaLD pack, which would allow you to play MegaLD Laserdiscs, Sega CDs, and Sega Genesis or Mega Drive carts. And what these were external devices that you would put into a slot on the Laseractive, which then gave it that little extra technology boost to play these games from NEC or Sega, because they had the hardware from each respective console inside these packs. So in the case of the NEC one, it had a little slot for the Hue cards, and then for the Sega one, it had a slot for the Mega Drive cartridges, which then you could also put in the Power Pack and play Sega Master System games on that as well. And then for the CDs, there was a tray on the Laseractive that, for the CDs specifically, because of course it could play music CDs. And then with the added power of these packs, you could play your game CDs from either the Sega CD or the PC Engine CD-ROM 2. And so this game here, Goku, is a Sega MegaLD game, which was a Laserdisc game developed specifically by Sega. But before we dive into that, I'd just like to mention that this came out in 1993 and was in direct competition with the 3DO and the CDI as a multi-purpose multimedia home console. And again, we should all know how well that went for all these consoles that tried doing this. I should also mention that there were a couple more things made for the Laseractive. One, the computer interface pack, which allowed for remote control from a PC or Mac computer. Which, why for to do this? Because it's pretty damn cool, I guess. And then the other device made for this console were the 3D goggles, which had compatibility with 6 of the Laserdisc-based games. And hey, as an extra added bonus, you could use them with the Sega Master System games that require the 3D goggles on that Sega Master System. It's cool, but you would need the ADP1 model adapter, which would allow you to plug in 2 3D glasses at once. Isn't that neat? But it just wasn't enough. On top of, the console itself being pretty expensive, the packs also being a few $100 each, the laser discs being, you'd imagine those things are expensive because they're huge, like 12 inches, they're thicker than a CD, and there is a lot more probability of them being damaged, scratched, and a good number of them being double-sided, so a good chance of double the scratching to happen. It's a pretty expensive hobby to have. But as I've heard, I've never actually seen one in action, but the quality of the videos on the Laserdiscs are pretty dang high. So now to get into this game here, Goku, which again is not the Goku you're probably thinking of, Son Goku from Dragon Ball Z, though it is Goku, though it's the Japanese name for Sun Wukong, who is the Monkey King from the story of Journey to the West. And you would imagine, hey, this might be a pretty exciting game. Listen to this music. It's got to be like some kind of action game where you get to play as the Monkey King. No. It's some edutainment goodness. Oh, yes, sir, Bob. So Goku is your host for this. He kind of tells you what's going on, everything, and you learn about the 7 wonders of the world. Isn't that great? And so side 1 consists of learning about the 7 wonders, going through all this information, seeing the cool pictures, some videos going on. But side 2 is where some cool stuff happens, where you have the Imaginal Beasts, where you can actually play around with kind of coloring these things. They're all different kind of mythical creatures. I think there was one, a dinosaur, a mermaid, a unicorn, centaur, all this kind of cool stuff. But then there's a mode where you can actually watch the Imaginal Beast moving in 3D. You put on your 3D goggles and you get to see everything just kind of cool and 3D like. But then there are full videos going on where you get to choose music, so music 1 or music 2, and then it plays this whole video of just the Imaginal Beasts just doing their things. Kind of like if you're familiar with Mind's Eye, basically that, just 3D models just kind of going around like demo time. And as I said, this is music 1 for the Imaginal Beasts that plays in the background of that video. Otherwise, you have the second option, music 2, which is the same video but different music. And then the other one is, of course, of the 7 wonders, where it is a full 3D video of going through all the different 7 wonders. And of course, you have your choice of the 2 different kinds of music. And That's it. And how do I know this? Well, in my search of music for this game, I just watched these videos and, kind of caught me because, again, it reminded me of watching the Mind's Eye series when I was a kid, which was just very early CGI demos kind of put together with music as a theme, and it was really cool. If you haven't seen them, you can find them on YouTube. The Mind's Eye and Beyond the Mind's Eye. Those are the two I would recommend. The other ones, So now getting into the music, at least the majority of it on side B, which this is from, is by Haroini Hosono, who is the last surviving member of Yellow Magic Orchestra, which is why probably for some you're hearing this and this sounds like some late 80s, early 90s era YMO, and there it is. And so now what's interesting here is that he only has 4 game credits, all of them on the Laseractive through Sega. So the first one we got is Melon Brains, then Goku, Lattice, and 3D Museum. So Hosono is considered as one of the most influential musicians in Japan. I mean, he is one of the ones that actually inspired the genres of city pop, and one I'm just now finding out, Shibuya-kei, which for some bizarre reason, I'm only just now finding out about this, and I'm actually pretty excited because I have a new musical deep dive to get into, but from the little I have listened to it, it answers so many questions for the soundtrack of Sonic Shuffle. I mean, just the sound of the Shibuya-kei just screams that Y2K aesthetic. But now getting back to Hosono, of course, being one of the founding members of Yellow Magic Orchestra, he actually composed the main theme song for Nausicaa, Valley of the Wind. And he of course had other musical groups outside of YMO, did a lot of solo projects. But one of the coolest things about him, in context of what we're talking about here, is that he is one of the first music producers to acknowledge the appeal of video game music. And that's pretty damn apparent in YMO's first self-titled album, where they're using sounds from video games in some of the songs, namely Circus. And so we move on to our next disc-based console. This one also coming from Bandai, and this one featuring the Goku that you are thinking of. This is coming from the Bandai Palladium. The track title is unknown, but the game it's coming from is Dragon Ball Z Shin Saiyajin Zetsumetsu Keikaku Chikyuhen, which translates to Dragon Ball Z Plan to Eradicate the Saiyans, Earth Chapter. Composer unknown. And that was an unnamed track from Dragon Ball Z, Plan to Eradicate the Saiyans, Earth Chapter. Composer unknown, from the Bandai Palladium. So this game has a pretty interesting history to it. So it started out as a card battle role-playing game on the Nintendo Famicom, and then there were 2 OVAs made to kind of correlate with this. So the first one, the Earth half, was made, and it was just like an actual OVA video thing, but then the second half was made as a visual guide for the space half of the game. So just a quick synopsis of the plot of this OVA. Dr. Lychee, who is the last surviving member of the Tuffles, who were destroyed by the Saiyans, wishes to get his revenge on the Saiyans, so he sends, devices to planet Earth where the last remaining Saiyans are and causes mayhem. And so our heroes, Goku, Vegeta, Trunks, Piccolo, Gohan, go on, destroy these devices, fight some ghosts, fight some all these other things, and then they go to space, face off Dr. Lychee, he unleashes his creation, Hachiyak, more shenanigans ensue, and then Goku gets the win, again. Now where this game comes into play is that they took the first half of the OVA, the Earth half, and turned it into a interactive FMV-based game, adventure game type thing. So, you're putting in commands at certain times to either hit your opponents or, if you block and all this stuff, it's interesting. And there's some things I glazed over on that Earth half part of the OVA is that there are some random enemies, like, that have never shown up in the show or the manga ever, and, you gotta beat them up. Now to go beyond this game, the story doesn't end for Plan to Eradicate the Saiyans, because as a special bonus, in Dragon Ball Z Raging Blast 2, they totally redid it. They rescripted it to condense it down to the more key points. They revoiced it, they reanimated it, and it looks pretty good. This is the one I've seen. I didn't see it through Raging Blast 2. I've never played that one, but I've only watched it, I think, on YouTube or some other way. But yeah, that's Dragon Ball Z. Plan to Eradicate the Saiyans. So now, like I said for this game, and I'd imagine they also did the second part, I'm not quite sure. This is an FMV game where they took the OVA, chopped it up, and kind of mix it together to interact with the different inputs you would put in for whatever scene you're at. So if you're playing, say, as Goku and you're fighting Frieza, it'll either show Goku punching Frieza or blocking Frieza or getting hit by Frieza depending on what inputs you put in, all that kind of shenanigans. So now, about the Playdia. Yep, we've returned to Bandai, and they couldn't keep their hands out of the video game market, and they made this as another multimedia type console, but geared toward kids. And a lot of the games on it were, of course, as you'd imagine, edutainment, some puzzle games, and then some games like this one here, FMV-based action games, I'd imagine. But yeah, anyway, Bandai was the only software developer for this console, and a lot of them were based on properties they own, like Dragon Ball Z, Gundam, Sailor Moon, and Ultraman. And, you can imagine it didn't last very long, but it was an interesting thing. Again, it was CD-based, it looked like a toy. The controller was infrared-based, so it wasn't connected to the console. It had, it was controlled through IF communicators, and it took 3 AAA batteries. So hey, wireless controller, that's pretty cool, right? But it unfortunately didn't last very long, only from 94 to 96, and when Bandai discontinued it, and all the consoles they still had in their warehouse were sold to Banpresto, which then converted them to what's called the Midget Kingdom machines, which were basically just devices to play anime clips in arcades and shops. So it at least got some extra life in it, if not for the purpose that it was originally intended. Alright, so now we're going to get back into some somewhat familiar territory, the Amiga CD32. So this is Select Screen from Donk, the Samurai Duck, composed by Tim Erickson. And that was Select Screen from Donk, the Samurai Duck, by Tim Erickson from the Commodore Amiga CD32. And I tell you what, this song, and just the entire soundtrack for that matter, is just 90s as f***, at least for this CD version of the soundtrack. There is a standard Amiga mod version of the soundtrack done by Carl Jeremy, and that is maybe not as good as this. It's pretty standard Amiga platformer fare, but this CD version, it's pretty damn good, and I might actually do a focus on the soundtrack. I'm thinking about it. But yes, I should note here that unlike the rest of the games I featured here, this is not exclusive to its CD console, because a lot of the games that are on the CD32 were on the Amiga computer originally, were ported over to the CD format, and in some cases, like Donk here, it got CD quality audio, had some nice touch-ups on the graphics, like the backgrounds at the stages and the stage select as well, animated cutscenes, which actually look pretty dang cool, and of course, the CD quality Red Book audio you're hearing right now. But in some cases, the games were just taken straight from the floppy and slapped onto CDs without anything being changed to be optimized for this new format. Speaking of which, the Amiga CD32, it is technically the first 32-bit console released. Though the FM Towns Marty beat it by a few months, its data bus was 16 bits, whereas the CD32s were 32 bits. And so this was an actual console, though there were a lot of peripherals that you could buy that could then turn it into kind of a computer type thing on the same level as the Amiga 1200, and it is a successor to the very much failed CD-TV, which was the Commodore Dynamic Total Vision, which I could have featured here because it is also a CD-based console, but a lot of the music was using the same Paula sound chip from the Amiga computers, so it would have just been like the 4-channel mods, though there are some CD quality audio. I just couldn't find any good versions of it, of games that were exclusive to the CD-TV, only from games that were also released elsewhere. And damn it, I'm sticking to that hard limit I put on myself. But yeah, quick thing on the CD32, it was released in 1991. It was basically a Commodore computer with an extra CD drive, remote control, and some extra things. But a lot of people just ignored it totally because there was a CD drive for the Amiga computers that was going to be released soon, so it just totally did not work at all. So Commodore decided to try it again, but with the CD32. And that only lasted 1 year, from 93 to 94. And that was largely due to the fact that Commodore International went bankrupt. Oh yes, so as soon as that happened, they just put full stop on the 32. And of course, it didn't help that there were other CD-based consoles that were doing better than what it was doing, and as well as just the amount of shovelware that was being put on there. Like again, floppy disk to CD with nothing else. But hey, at least there was some use for these consoles after this point because, for example, there was an Italian company that used it as a base for an arcade cabinet. Some places in Canada were using it for driver's test modules. The motherboards were used in some slot machines such as Hawaiian Delight, Leprechaun Luck, and Mr. Magic by Star Games. And a really cool one is that they were used to run interactive exhibits for the London Transport Museum. So now, Donk, Samurai Duck, I bet you're wondering about that. Well, the story goes is you play as a duck that has been raised by samurai and taught the ways of the samurai. So he has a full set of armor, has a sword, and you gotta go through all these stages collecting all these crystals because this here is a Euro platformer and you gotta collect all kinds of things and find all kinds of secrets throughout 112 stages. Now, as far as how it looks pretty decent. The animations on the sprites are pretty nice. The backgrounds, especially on the CD32 version, are really cool. Not as wacky as something like Zool, but you can tell the team that made this, The Hidden, put a lot of love behind it, especially with this new CD audio by Tim Erickson, which came as a total surprise to me when I was looking for games that were CD32 exclusive-ish, because I had another pick before this from Jet Strike, which then turned out to have other releases. So then I found another one called Labyrinth of Time, which in a forum had a list of games that were exclusive to the 32, which then turned out to not be the case. So I just went looking and saw Donk, the Samurai Duck, and that intrigued me. Found the soundtrack, and here we are listening to some 90s-ass piano house. Though there are only a couple songs like this in the soundtrack, the rest of it is pretty varied, but also really cool. So, like I said, future episode, possibly. And then Tim Erickson, I couldn't really find anything on him. I found some other Tim Ericksons that also were involved in music, but I don't know if it's the same guy, because I didn't see anything mentioned about Donk, though I don't know if he would want that having a mention on him, but yeah, so I don't really have anything. So now we're going to move on to something that really didn't need to happen, but did. So this is the Mattel Hyperscan, and we're going to be hearing Japan from X-Men, composed by Bryce Knight, Bill King, and Stephen Ablett. just heard Japan from X-Men, composed by Bryce Knight, Bill King, and or Stefan Ablett. And this was released on the Mattel Hyperscan. And what's that? Never heard of the Mattel Hyperscan? Well, I got something to tell you. I hadn't either until just now. And I know why. Because, well, it was released in 2006, when many a powerhouse was released, like the PS3, the Xbox 360, the Wii, none of which I've ever owned. We can't blame ourselves for missing this one, the Hyperscan. So let's see here, released late 2006 and then discontinued in 2007, only had 5 games released for it. We got Ben 10, Marvel Superheroes, Spider-Man, X-Men, and International Wrestling League, which is the only one that isn't a licensed title. So in the mid-2000s world of gimmicky toys, what did this one have? Well, it's right there in the name, Hyperscan, because you got these cards that you can then scan into, depending on which game you have. It'll either, select the character, do actions, give you power-ups, and there's a lot of these cards, like actually about 50 per game, though the Ben 10 one had 80. That's a lot of cards to collect, a lot of money to spend on them too. And now again here I'll reference AVGN because he actually has a video about this console, and I'll tell you, watching it, it took him a couple tries to actually get this thing to scan a card. So, even its gimmick didn't even work that good. And so what else did Mattel have to sell this console on? Definitely not its visuals. Nope, thems are just very choppy 2D sprite animation, though some of them actually look like just very heavily compressed animation cells just put in there, and yeah. But hey, at least the audio, as far as I've heard, is mostly decent. It's running off the CD, though as you can hear here, it's pretty dang crunchy. But compared to the VTech V-Flash, which is another CD-based toy console thing, that was fully 3D, but the music I've heard in that is all just general MIDI, and I couldn't find any isolated music from any of those games, so, I'm not featuring it here, and, again, general MIDI, most of it, from what I've heard in, like, the gameplay footages, not that good. Though, interesting, the VTech V-Flash used something very similar to how the PSP had the UMDs, which were the little discs inside the cartridge that you slotted in there. They had basically just full-on CDs inside this cheap plastic casing that went into a cartridge slot in that thing, but that's all you get. Look it up yourself. We're talking about the Mattel Hyperscan, which I don't really have much more to say about it because, yeah, there's not really much to it. Without its Hyperscan gimmick, it's not really much anything special. It's just like, those Tiger Electronics handhelds, just quickly put together garbage. And so now this game, simply titled X-Men, is a fighting game. And again, you gotta select your character by scanning a card. And again, it takes you a few times, and then I think you use special abilities with the same scan cards. And this is one of those games that AVGN played, and it looks rough. Now these composers here, we'll start from the one that has the least credits to the most credits. So starting with Stefan Ablett, all he has is this game here, X-Men on Hyperscan. And then Bryce Knight, he has X-Men on Hyperscan, but his first project was Thomas and Friends Full Speed Ahead, which was a interactive DVD. And that's it. And now, Bill King here. He's interesting. He got to start in 1992 with the Sega CD port of Lunar, the Silver Star, as audio re-recording, and then Vey in 93 as additional music, as well as for Popful Mail, Dragon Force, all of these the Sega CD versions of these, and then on the Sega Saturn we have Albert Odyssey, The Legend of Eldian. So far, pretty cool stuff under his belt here, but then after this, he gets into, the kind of just shovelware kind of schlock stuff. We got Hot Wheels Stunt Track Driver, Michelle Kwan Figure Skating, Hot Wheels Stunt Track Driver 2, Getting Dirty, Real War, Rogue State, and I should mention that all these games were PC games, and then his last credit is X-Men on the Hyperscan. So kind of a fizzle out there, huh? So now we're going to move on to a console that was more of an add-on that was released a little more than 10 years before the Hyperscan, but did it fare a little better? I guess it depends on your definition of better, but, we're going to be talking about the Atari Jaguar CD. This is track 3 from Iron Soldier 2, composed by Joachim Gierwald and Mario Nizovic. that was track 3 from Iron Soldier 2, composed by Joachim Girvald and Mario Nezovic from the Atari Jaguar CD. And yes, the Jaguar CD was technically a peripheral add-on for the Atari Jaguar console, very much like how the Sega CD was to the Sega Genesis. You know, you just put it into the cartridge slot, and then bam, you got yourself a CD-ROM drive. Though in the case of the Jaguar, it actually had a cartridge pass-through so that you could have cartridges and CDs at the same time, though the design looked kinda like a toilet. Which I guess is appropriate because this peripheral was pretty much... it was released towards the end of 95 and didn't even last probably halfway through 96 before it was just totally discontinued. This thing only had like 13 games released for it. So, though there are some unreleased games in Homebrew that have also been released for it, because there are hobbyists for this console, I guess. And there's not really much more I can say about it other than, there's one cool little fact, is that the CD format for the Jaguar CD was based off audio CDs, so it had a little extra storage, and that there was a cool audio visualizer built into the peripheral programmed by Jeff Mintner, who had created, Tempest 3000 for audio CDs, which I guess Tempest 2000's audio or soundtrack was packaged with the peripheral, so you could stick it in there and listen to it. So that was, I guess, kind of cool. Now, getting into Iron Soldier 2, this may come as a surprise, seeing as, this CD peripheral wasn't all that well received. This game itself was actually pretty well received. It was considered the best game on both versions of the console, like the standard Jaguar and the Jaguar CD. And I think a big part of that is because of the visuals, the graphics of it, because it is a fully 3D first-person shooter where you control a mech. So you have this actual console around the main screen, and you're going around shooting things, blowing up buildings, and attacking other mechs. And though unfortunately there isn't music playing during the gameplay, I guess the music plays during the menus and cutscenes if there's any of those. But yeah, still pretty impressive for what it is. But I guess those are kind of the big ones for this game, because otherwise it is pretty damn hard, because I guess compared to the original Iron Soldier, the difficulty is ramped up, and so you're just getting constantly blasted by your enemies. So instead, let's focus on its positives, like the music, done by Joachim Girvald and Mario Nezovic, which, there definitely is a reason why it's praised for its audio, because this soundtrack is pretty dang good. It's a cool mix of techno, some industrial, and a smattering of just really cool stuff like this. So yeah, those composers. Starting with Joachim Girvald, he only has 2 credits for the first Iron Soldier and then this game, Iron Soldier 2. And then Mario Nezovic has 4 audio credits, that being Stone Age, Iron Soldier, Doofus, and Iron Soldier 2. Though he has many other credits for programming, design, art, and video. So we got Mayday Conflict as video cinematics, UGG as art and graphics. For programming and engineering, we got Thylon the first year, Transworld, the second world, Roly Ronnie, UGG, Stone Age, Magnetic, Surfen mit der Jungenfa, Realms of Arcania 3, Shadows of Riva, New Beetle Tracks and Gaps, which he also did design for, and then finally Mayday Conflict Earth. And so now let's get into our last, but definitely not least, failed disc-based console. This being the 3DO, which is an interesting one. So what I got here is World Map 2 from Guardian War, composed by Yasufumi Fukuda and or Yukiharu Urita.
.3DO.
and that was World Map 2 from Guardian War, composed by Yasufumi Fukuda and or Yukiharu Urita from the 3DO Interactive Multiplayer. Developed by the 3DO company, manufactured by multiple companies, Panasonic, Sanyo, Goldstar, and Creative Technology, with the Panasonic one being the first one released in 1993. And the reason behind it being manufactured by many companies is because the 3DO company itself did not have the means to produce the hardware, so they licensed the technology out to these companies that were interested in producing the console for them, so then the 3DO company would collect royalties on each console sold. So that's why the initial high price for the consoles were there, so that these manufacturers could make their money back on what they produced, which was one of the first hits to its potential success. So the 3DO company wanted this console to be a all-in-one home entertainment device, for your games, for your music, for your movies, and potentially for your computing. Where have we heard that before? But this console wasn't all bark, as far as the gaming side of things went, because it was one of the first home consoles to actually be able to play, pretty good ports of modern PC titles at the time, like Myst, Alone in the Dark, and Star Control 2, as well as near arcade perfect ports of Samurai Showdown and Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo. But, a lot of the early games for this console were unfortunately a lot of those interactive movie type games, FMV, cutscene type things, edutainment, the good stuff. And so you can imagine the console didn't fare too well here in the States. It was considered one of the worst console launches in 1993, though surprisingly, it launched in Japan in 1994 to some initial success. It sold a lot of units, and it had over 200 games released by Japanese companies for it, half of those only being Japan exclusive, which a couple I remember off the top of my head are Oyaji Hunter Mahjong and D, which was directed by the late Kenji Ino, which if you don't know who that is, there is an amazing documentary about him that is available on YouTube, and his story as well as the story behind the creation of D and his other games are just fascinating, and it's really worth a watch. And then if you're wondering why I mentioned Oyaji Hunter, that's because I was introduced to that through the Pixelated Audio episode 50, where they just picked a bunch of random tracks, and they picked track 2 from that one, and that is a wacky ass song, and I might eventually play it on here eventually. The bass in there you can feel in the back of your throat. It's really weird. But now getting back to the 3DO, well, everything fell over as soon as the PlayStation and the Saturn were released. Now there is a whole lot more about the 3DO I could get into, but again, there's a lot of it. But thankfully, there is a podcast I just recently discovered called The 3DO Experience with Bill and Thrack, where they've done game focuses, company focuses, can focus on the controllers and all the different versions of the consoles made by the different manufacturers. And I'm kind of excited to dive into this podcast because I'm up for some video game esoterica. But what I will tell you about is this here game, Guardian War, released in Japan and Europe as Powers Kingdom. This here is a micro cabin joint, the same company responsible for Illusion City and the Izak series. So it may come as no surprise that this is considered one of the best games on the 3DO, as well as one of the better RPGs to come out around that time, this being 1994. Visually, it is fully polygonal, 3D, and though it may look simplistic, it actually has a really nice appealing look to it. But what I've read of it, don't let the simplistic looks fool you, because underneath it is a fairly complex battle system. So this here is a strategy RPG, things like Tactics Ogre, Shining Force, and your party is made up of these golems that you are controlling to fight evil forces. And the cool thing about these is that you can have up to 3 bodies per golem. So the first one that's slotted in will be the main body, it'll affect like the stats and all this stuff, but then the other 2 that you can have will grant you special abilities and other such things, depending on if you have the enough magic point. And as you can probably imagine, these golem bodies are the class system. So really looking into this game, it seems like it's kind of a shame that it was only released on the 3DO. But maybe it's a good reason to get a 3DO if you're really curious about it. But this definitely looks and feels like something that could have been ported over to the PS1 or the Saturn when those came out, but oh well. So now getting into the music, this track here, I'd imagine for many folks that metallic rhythmic sound you're hearing in the background will have many folks saying that they've heard that before. But where? Well, maybe try Aquatic Ambience, because that is the Korg wave station which Dave Wise actually used in that song, that kind of like rhythmic, evolving kind of metallic sound that's kind of going on in there, that's like a signature sound in that track. That's what it is. Though for me, my first encounter with this sound, this triggers some real deep childhood memories, is in this VHS that we had called Beyond the Mind's Eye, which was a collection of CG animated demos that are just put together in themes and stuff with music done by John Hammer. And the first song that this thing opens up with, called Virtual Reality, literally, first it'll have kind of this cool, kind of almost Vangelis style synth going on, but then as soon as it hits in there, this sound is playing right there, and that's where my mind immediately goes to, and then you hear it throughout like all the different songs in Beyond the Mind's Eye, which I am now seriously considering doing a focus on those two soundtracks, The Mind's Eye and Beyond the Mind's Eye, or at least some of the songs, because they are such a huge part of my childhood as well as some of my musical taste. But yeah, getting back to this song, this definitely has kind of like a dark, new agey sound to it, and that's kind of the majority of the soundtrack is kind of dark, new agey. Some of it sounds like anime opening, some of it sounds like your standard RPG fare, and generally really good, and no wonder, because this is done by part of the Microcabin sound team, which if you're not familiar with their work, I would highly recommend you check out Illusion City for the MSX. I mean, that is a spectacular soundtrack right there, which both of these composers actually did music for alongside Tadahiro Nitta, who I plan on doing a focus episode on eventually. But for now, we're going to focus on these two, starting with Yukiharu Urita. You got to start with Zack, Precious Package, The Tower of Gazelle, Illusion City, Zack 3, The Eternal Recurrence, Guardian War, Yu Shigen, Galact Heroism, Lucian's Quest, Princess Maker 2, Busta Move 3, G Darius, now jumping ahead a little bit, Busta Move 4, Naval Ops, Warship Gunner, Busta Move on iPhone, Bubble Bobble 4 Friends in 2019, and then his latest credit is 2022, Never Awake. Now getting into Yasufumi Fukuda, I'll note here that the large majority of his credits are voice editing and arrangements. But he also got to start with Zack Precious Package, The Tower of Gazelle, and Illusion City, of course. Then we have Elm Knight, The Life Stage, Guardian War, Frey and Magical Adventure CD Zack Guiding, and that's one whole title there. Princess Maker 2, Rigford Saga 2, Noon, New Type Action Game, Napple Tale, Arcia and Daydream, Shinobito Way of the Ninja, Blue Dragon, Harvest Moon, Animal Parade and Tree of Tranquility, The King of Fighters 2002 Unlimited Match, Ace Attorney Investigations, Miles Edgeworth, Sonic Generations, Banshee's Last Cry, Langrisser, Reincarnation Tensei, Phoenix Wright, Ace Attorney, Spirit of Justice, Story of Seasons, Pioneers of Olive Town, and his latest credit is O in 2023. And with that, that brings us to the end of this delightful dervish of disastrous disc devices. And I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did putting it together, and it inspires you to look more into some of these consoles or even other very strange consoles that don't really get talked too much about, because they have some surprising music on there as well as some surprising surprises that will surprise you surprisingly. And yeah, I'd like to thank you all for coming into VG Emporium, and if this is your first time in, quite a first experience, yeah? Welcome on in. And however you found VG Emporium, I just want to let you know you can also find it on all these podcatchers such as Spotify, Apple Music, YouTube Music, Amazon Audible, as well as on TerraPlayer, which is a hub for all kinds of video game related podcasts, as well as the main website, vgemporium.wordpress.com. And then, of course, you can follow VG Emporium at Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. And if you want to reach out to VG Emporium, like, leave some feedback, some comments, or suggestions, you can do so on those social medias or on Discord, which a link for that can be found in the show notes of this episode, where you can also make a song request, which is called a special order, which is, when I get about 5 or 6 of these in, I'll do their own dedicated episode. And you can send those in also via email to vgemporium@gmail.com. And then as for myself, your host, Rage Cage, you can also follow me on those social medias, Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook, where mostly you'll be finding nonsense like music I'm making and whatnot, and I'm actually currently taking place in what's called Weekly Beats, where I make a new song every single week, and I am sharing them on those social medias as well as on YouTube. Now, as far as what I have planned for next week, I haven't quite gotten that far. I'm gonna just kind of improv it, that's what this place thrives on. But I can guarantee you that there's going to be a guest episode the week after next week's episode, if not the second week after that. So that's going to be 3 weeks away after this episode. And I will leave it a mystery who it is for now. The only clue I'll give you is that they are a returning guest. So that gives you a few options there, huh? And if you include the not knowing what next week's episode is going to be, you got double mystery. Such fun. So again, thank you for coming into VG Emporium. And hopefully I bring you something good next week.